going to finish this book. But I think with Ivory Throne, it's not just for me, but all of these people here, you kind of cultivated a new generation of people who understood history or enjoyed history in a different way. So thank you for that. So my first question to you is, like when you look back, this 10 years of your writing, what is that one thing that surprises you the most about that book and how you wrote it?
I think 10 years of writing is also a way to remind yourself that you're much older now. And I think when I look back at the person who published that book at 25, now I'm like, oh, good Lord, you were a kid. Which, at that time I thought I was more mature and I was very serious and all of that. But in hindsight, when you look back and, 10 years have passed, a decade of your life, so much has happened in the intervening space that you feel, wow, that, I was a completely different person then. I don't think I'd change very much about the way I approach the book. Maybe I'd make it a bit shorter. I don't think 700 pages is a very wise idea in the 21st century. But otherwise, yeah, I think the book remains in many ways the most loved book I've done, especially when you work on it for several years. In Ivory Throne's case, it was 6 years. And 6 years of, kathinathwanam, as they say, where your sleep is sacrificed, where your social life is sacrificed, and then having something to put out into the world, that remains a very special feeling.
Yeah, even when I say that you're 10 years, you're a published author, but you've been a writer, say, 16 years, right? Because you started that project.
As you can see, I'm much older then, clearly.
Yeah, but, the first book, you addressed the theme of Travancore, and from there, I think you've been a little more adventurous and playful with the themes that you have chosen. You moved to Mughals and also, a broader theme in Indian history. So is there anything that influenced the way you pick topics and how you decide, oh, this is the next book I'm going to write?
I think it's an interest in just somewhat undertold stories. The second book actually wasn't on the Mughals per se. The Mughals were conquering these guys, but it was about the Deccan Sultanates, which again, they languish in the shadows of the Mughals. So just as the first book was focused on Setu Lakshmi Bai of Travancore, a sort of forgotten, marginalized figure, and I wanted to bring her back into the limelight. Similarly, Rebel Sultans was about picking up these principalities which were Islamic states ruled by Shia rulers in great measure, bringing them back into the spotlight. So I think that was the intention there. The third book was a collection of essays, again a bunch of quirky stories that spoke to me, appealed to me, etc. And so on. So I think there's no deliberate plan as to what you choose and why you choose a particular topic. I think in my case, it's usually what animates my interest, what captures my attention one way or the other. Sometimes it's also frustration with an ongoing project and then you ditch it and you do another book. So I did one half of God's Guns and Missionaries in 2020, ditched it, did another book called False Allies, then went back to the old manuscript, revived it and finished the book. So sometimes it's also just your brain finding the process a bit tedious and you're like, I need a break from this project, let me finish another project. But yeah.
But all of these books, including the first one, what made a difference to us as readers is, you're not just a historian and, no questioning about your thorough research and the years of hard work you put in. But, you're a brilliant storyteller. So now we associate these histories, which we learned or never understood or processed as students or as, college students, is you tell great stories, like they're enchanting and they're thought-provoking. They do everything that other history books don't do. Was it always a conscious decision to tell history through storytelling? Or are you a natural storyteller?
No, for me, very much, because that's something that pulled me towards history, the fact that, this could actually be made attractive. There is the analytical side, the academic side, all of that has its value. But what pulled me towards history was definitely the fact that you could also present it in a way that people found interesting and entertaining as well. I don't think these are bad words. I think having fun with a subject can be done. I think having fun with history is possible. History has plenty to entertain as much as it can enlighten. Both, these are not contradictory impulses. They exist in the same stories. So I think being able to emphasize storytelling comes very much from deep within, because that, I've always found that attractive. And I intend to keep doing more of that, because I think one way in which historical consciousness can be generated in people in general is by giving it to them in the form of stories that are relatable, understandable, etc. We live in a country of so many engineers and doctors. Their education doesn't provide them any access to the social sciences in general and to history in particular. So the only way they can access history is not through academic texts. You need accessible texts that are interesting to read, fun to read, etc. And I enjoy filling that gap. So for me, yeah, it remains a very personal choice, and I don't think I'll change the way I approach it. Although, again, depends on the book. So the last couple of books I did came out around the same time that I was finishing up my PhD, and I think a little bit of that PhD approach to writing filtered down into those books as well, because your mind is in that space. So I need to now revive myself and do a playful book very soon.
Okay. Like as much as you said, there are topics that would pick your interest, and then you will start digging from there, and then a book is born. But I would assume that as a successful, one of the most well-read and well-respected historian, you would also be sensing what the readers want. What are people expecting from you? Have you seen any kind of palpable change in the way what people are looking for you? What are they expecting? Because sometimes people, when they approach history, they're not just looking for out of curiosity. They also want validation of their own beliefs. So is that a challenge, and how do you approach that?
I bifurcate that into two things. One is there is a reading audience that you have, and all writers crave a sort of loyal reading audience. So any book you write, you know that, okay, this is my loyal audience, and you have an ongoing sort of dialogue with them through your work. And I think I've managed to build that loyal audience for the books. Where you see, what you're referring to is something you see more on social media, where you can sense that, okay, these are the things that interest people, or these are the things that people seem to like, because you can see that with the way certain reels do or certain videos do, etc. I don't actively cater to that, because again, I'm also interested in doing things that interest me. I'm not writing for the market. I'm writing for myself and my loyal audience, as it were, but not necessarily for the forces of the market. I think authors have a responsibility to shape the market as well, so that otherwise the market will just become some completely random stuff, right? Because people like sensationalism, people like religiously polarizing things, etc. Now, we live in a time where there are authors who've banked off that. Like, they've managed to profit off this political climate, etc. Because, there are writers now, for example, they do history books, and certain governments will buy 10,000 copies, outright. So you're getting a chunk of money out of government patronage and things like that. So I can see why people would be tempted by it, because it's big bucks to be made. But I think responsible writing requires you to be able to keep a sober distance from that kind of attraction, and to stick to what you believe is the right way to do this. So although you can sense these, what the public wants or what the public seems to want, because again, algorithms aren't entirely devoid of politics, right? Algorithms are also shaped to put out the worst kind of material, to sort of up sensational material, etc. So you therefore have to think twice before you, as you engage with those social media platforms, which I think I do fairly well. I've had my share of being cancelled and attacked and trolled and things like that, but I think that comes with the trade. There's no escaping that in today's world. If you're putting stuff out for a general audience as opposed to a seminar circuit, if you're talking to the general public, there's going to be certain people who are always going to come back and sort of bare their fangs at you and threaten you and things like that. You live with it. I think that's just how it is.
I'm surprised, because I always thought you are one author who have, steered away from all of these controversies. And you just mentioned you also got cancelled and trolled. Can you tell us what
I do steer away from it because I don't respond. So that usually helps. If you get upset is when it blows into something even bigger. For instance, just this morning, I woke up and, you sort of do your breakfast and all that. I was looking at my phone and I opened Instagram, and there's a reel about Mishkal Mosque here in Calicut, a very striking mosque about 600 years old, built by a Yemeni, etc. And the first comment I see today, this morning, was, oh, this was by some lady. This was a comment that said, oh, this was definitely built by invaders. This was a temple. The temple was taken over. No mosque has a column next to it, so this has to be a temple that was taken by invaders and turned into a mosque. And as I say, the Malayalam means, chorinju veriga. So there was a slight chorinju wedding of, I want to respond to this. But then I thought, it's not worth my time. The person is looking for oxygen. The problem is, if I respond, then 20 other people will also latch on, and this will turn into one big jhagada on social media. And I don't want that on my page. I don't want that in my energy. So block button, move on in life. Because people who are interested in the truth, they're not going to be throwing around nuggets of nonsense with such confidence anyway. So I think you also need to learn which battles to pick. battles to fight, and in general not get drawn into a lot of these social media quarrels. And the social media quarrels come from all quarters, by the way. So I mean, there is the right. The right tends to be more loud and dominant, etc. But equally from the other side also, I've got my share of brickbats, because certain topics, you say something or you believe in a certain conclusion that doesn't appeal to one set of people, you'll get brickbats from there. Another time it'll be this set of people, you get brickbats from there. So I think in my case, people are also confused as to where I stand on the political spectrum and all of that. But the point is, with history, it isn't your politics that's supposed to lead you. You may have your politics, but you're supposed to be led by the evidence. And if in the process you're trolled and all of that, as you said, if I steer clear of it, it is an active choice as opposed to engaging with it. Engaging also is profitable. You know, if I start engaging with it, I'll also build followers and all of that.
Okay. Yeah, you know, the fact that Manu is saying that he gets trolled and brickbats, I think that says a lot about the times that we live. Because throughout your writing, one thing that you have, I believe, consciously done is not to have a binary on anything. You know, you are looking at the nuances and the complexities and the layers. That's what you've tried to tell, and if people still want to, pick battles, that says a lot about them and not about your writing. But just coming back to social media that you said, you know, we all understood history from the archives, like from the dusty archives. That's the job of some historian. But now, as you rightly said, it has moved from the archives to algorithms. And that's what you read. And there is a new generation that is growing up while they have the opportunity to read writers like you, but they understand history from these reels, viral clips. So is that challenging for a historian?
I think,
because that's an audience that you're addressing.
I don't think we can make that binary between algorithms and the archives, because the archives are where the truth lies, as it were. The algorithms are a mechanism to push that out into the general public, and that's where the algorithms have their own logic, etc. So it's not the case that it's either or. It is the archives that have historical material. Whether or not the algorithms choose or allow certain facts to come forward, that's a different conversation altogether. Again, I think I'm generally a bit of an optimist. I believe even the Gen Z kids are dumb enough to think that everything they see on social media is the truth. Because the thing is also, these are kids who've been raised with the internet around them. From the time they were born, the internet, social media, it's all been around. I think we'll reach a point where people will be able to tell the difference between what is sensationalist stuff on social media versus what's the facts of the matter. At least that's my optimistic take on it, and that's my hope as far as historical research is concerned. But I think historians also probably need to engage more on social media. This is something I've been saying for the last 10 years, because I think if you have good historical research available, it is also important to make the effort to put it out there. There was a time when people got their education, got their sources from college, from the classroom, from academic spaces. While those spaces still remain, the way the knowledge economy works is now very diffused. It's all over the place. A lot of these boundaries no longer exist in the same old-fashioned ways, which means that the onus is on us to put ourselves out there. As I said earlier, even at the risk of trolling, lawsuits, this, that, you still have to put yourself out there. That's the only way you can at least have a foot in this business of fighting the algorithm and what the algorithm is putting forward, etc., etc.
And also, Manu, we understand history as our past, but now history is also about, they have turned history into who we are and what is our identity and our culture is. And I think in 2015, when you first published, the landscape was not so volatile. History was not this political battlefield that it is now. I think 2014 is, if I remember rightly, the book, The Hindus by An Alternative History by Wendy. But, it got pulped by Penguin. But I think it was just the beginning of it. But in the last 10 years, it has gotten really vicious. Does that unsettle you as a historian?
I mean, it should
how do you navigate it?
It should unsettle all of us. And I think it unsettles most people who've been trolled, etc. And trolled for various reasons. It's not just historians, right? Like, women are trolled on a regular basis. I was recently a few months ago on a show with an anchor called Ranjani Haridas. She's, I think, one of the first people in Kerala to be comprehensively trolled about 15 years ago. Before trolling even became a career option for a lot of people on the internet, she was one of those original people who was trolled, and horribly, horribly, horribly trolled. So I think women in general get trolled anyway. People putting out something that goes against the grain get trolled. Sometimes you get trolled for your political opinion. Sometimes you get trolled for what you're wearing. All of those things happen in general. So I think historians are also occupying and operating in that space. Now, does it bother me in terms of how people consume facts and information? To a certain extent, but not excessively. And my very first book, Ivory Throne, the funny thing is that book stemmed from a blog post I did when I was about 18 years old. In those days, 2008, some of you were not born then, I'm assuming, but in 2008, there was this big blogging culture where, WordPress, Blogspot, these are all the blogging websites. And we'd all put out blogs, which I assumed 10 people were reading my blogs, which was my Facebook friends from college, etc. But I remember that was where I did a post on Setu Lakshmi Bai of Travancore based on some initial material I'd got together. I was an 18-year-old kid. And I remember I got trolled for that post. There was a whole bunch of royalists from Trivandrum who descended onto that blog post and started attacking me, saying things like, oh, you know, back in the day, if you entered our palaces, your hands would be chopped off, this, that. And I was like, that was back in the day. We are sitting here and this is my blog. So, I got a taste of that trolling all the way back then in 2008. Except that instead of putting me off the project, it generated some vashi that I'm going to turn this into a book. So that's what ended up happening. So I think this whole business of trolling, we shouldn't, given that this is the reality of the world today, I don't think we should be bothered by it in the sense of allowing it to keep us away from something or thinking that, oh, if I do this, I'll be trolled. The moment you start thinking, acting, writing defensively, I think you've already lost half the battle. You just have to put your neck out there and do what you have to do. The trolling, etc., is happening to everybody. So you just have to, I think, live with the risk.
You know, we spoke about history as identity, and that's what people are trying to find answers there. You know, India was ruled by, we were under the colonial rule for nearly 200 years, but we have centuries of Islamic invasion also. But, there seems to be a kind of particular attention given to that particular era of Islamic invasion, and we refuse to bury that past. We refuse to bury certain characters like Tipu Sultan or Aurangzeb or Babur. And why is that this obsession about our past? Or is there a parallel that you can draw from any other societies, or is it just particular to
all
us?
societies are fighting over history, partly because political ideologies, your sense of identity, your sense of nationhood especially. Once the nation state as a concept emerges, nation states need mythologies. Nation states need linear narratives of how the nation was formed, etc. In India, predominantly what happened is that if you look at the Congress side of history, or the way the Congress approached history in the previous 70 odd years, their logic was that we were fine till the British came as colonizers, and therefore the British are the villains of the story. Before that, everything here was fine. We accept all the previous history as a legitimate part of our culture and our narrative, etc., but not the British segment. And we fought the British, and we revived our sense of self. With the Hindu right, they just extend the colonial argument by another 800 years, saying that actually colonialism began with the first Islamic invasions in the Sindh in the 8th century or whatever it is. And that's how, so you really need to take the argument all the way back to that point. So both are nationalistic sort of takes on history, which is why these keep bubbling up in public imagination, because these are two political camps that are constantly at loggerheads about this. If you soberly study history, you realize that, frankly, all of these are extremely complicated processes. Colonialism, if you look at it one way, oppressive, bad structure, etc., terrible for the country, all of that. But the same colonial forces also allowed Dalits political mobilization. It also allowed access to education for a lot of marginalized groups. It also created avenues, not deliberately, but it created avenues for new segments of Indian society to assert themselves. Which is why you have Dalit scholars in North India who worship they installed a temple, I think, to a goddess called Angrezi Devi, the goddess of English, because they thought English had liberating value. At a time where you weren't allowed access to the regular traditional schools, you were able to go to an English school.
Where is that temple? I'm sorry.
I think they've demolished it now.
Okay.
It was in Uttar Pradesh somewhere, called Angrezi Devi. You'll find it online. There's even a picture of Angrezi Devi holding a book or something. There's a photograph somewhere, you'll find it. So, and the thing is, both elements are true. From the Dalit perspective, you can understand that, colonial era dynamics allowed them access to education, etc. A figure like Jyotiba Phule was actually called anti-national and things like that in the 19th century because he seemed often to side with the Raj, as it were, when others were saying we must fight the Raj. But his point was that it's easy for you to say fight the Raj, but I'm fighting an internal battle as well, where for me, this set of dynamics is empowering. So it's not the case that one is true, the other is false. Both are true. Similarly, when you go into the Islamic period, there were certain people who were violent, and there was a period of aggression and invasion. But then there's also places like Kerala, there's also South India in general. In Tamil Nadu, I think you have a Tamil version of the Quran that came in ages ago. Sirapuranam, I think it's called. In Kerala, the legend takes it back to the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad himself when Islam came here. There's no, that whole black and whiteization of history. We like binaries, we like black and white answers, but a sober study of history teaches you that that is really not how the past works. But the question is, we're all human beings. We're all emotional beings. So no matter how much I sit here and pontificate about history being an objective process, or we should at least attempt to study it in an objective fashion, most people relate to history emotionally. Most people relate to history through the prism of experience, culture, etc. So people end up looking for that black and white. I think it's a constant battle that will always be there. It's existed in the past. It's been there through the last 70 years. It's there in our present. It will continue into the future. I think the job of a historian then is to keep reminding people that I understand your emotional impulse. I understand the fact that history isn't just objective facts for you, that there is something emotional over there. But maybe you can look at it this way. I think that's a constant dialogue and conversation that's got to be there. I don't think we can reduce anything to black and white.
See, when you talk about the role of historians, I want to go back to the point that you raised about historians earlier. See, there is a new band of historians, the right-wing so-called Hindutva historians, who claim that, and these are, there is a bit of intellectual foundation to what they are saying. So these are not clips or reels that, just come up from nowhere, where there is a narrative that there was a conscious attempt by the left-leaning liberal historians to whitewash what happened in the past, especially when it comes to the destruction of temples and the Islamic invasion. So now they are righting that wrong. So somebody who, not because of the political ideologies, who are genuinely curious to understand the history, it's a challenge because there are now two different sets of narratives that come out. What would your advice for genuinely curious people? How do you navigate this landscape?
I think even if you're accusing past historians of skewing history in one direction, the answer to that is not skewing it in the other direction, right? The answer to that is to find an objective, reasonable, sensible, sober approach to history. So again, even if you assume that there was a leftification of history, the answer is not a rightification of history. Because I'm again skewing it, which means 20 years from now, another set of people come into power, they again veer it back to the left, as it were. So I think this is again one of those, there's always a kind of darbar historian, which is patronized histories, where government patronizes you, the state patronizes you. The moment you fall into that, then irrespective of your personal whatever, you're going to produce history that caters to the people patronizing you. So there's always going to be that kind of history. We just need to be able to tell the difference between darbar history and objectively studied history. On the question of how to study it, if there is left and right and all of that, is again just look for complexity. We're sitting in Malabar. There's something called the Mapla rebellion here just over 100 years ago, and it's quite interesting that one set of historians for the longest time said this was purely driven by economics. It was landlords, the peasants and the tenants happened to be Muslims, so it was an uprising that way. Yeah. Another set of historians viewed it purely from the prism of nationalism, saying there was the Khilafat movement, and this was an extension of the Khilafat movement that was taking place. A third set of historians have always looked at the right-wing version of it, saying that this was actually a genocide of Hindus and all that. The word genocide is used by this third set of people. If you actually look at the facts of the matter, it's a strange khichdi of all of these factors. Yeah. Firstly, when you have something called the Mapla rebellion, it isn't like there's some capital where there's a chief Mapla sitting there issuing orders that everybody's obeying. It's a chaotic event. If you look at the papers from the time, they refer to gangs operating in different places. Now, in some places, they would have operated and there might have been cases of religious fanaticism. In other places, the trigger would have been economic in nature, which is that you had a landlord who was oppressive, and this was an opportunity to hit back against the landlord. In a third place, you might find that, yes, the nationalist impulse was higher. So all of these three impulses are operating together. And I think a historian just has to point out the fact that it's possible for all three to operate together. You don't have to put it into a box of, oh, this was a religious genocide. Oh, this was a nationalist struggle. It was a mixed up event. How neat is our current life in the present? It's not neat, right? Even if you think, okay, India is ruled by a right-wing government, is their power total? It's not. States are ruled by different kinds of parties. There's still opposition in parliament. There are still processes. there's still a system they have to navigate, right? So in the future, 20 years from now, if I say, oh, this was the time when India was completely sort of Hinduized, that would be a simplistic argument because there is also resistance constantly taking place. Every journalistic article that is written, every blog that is published, every website that does journalism as opposed to what passes for journalism in some quarters, all of these are also part of the story. So I think we need to be able to look at the composite of history as opposed to, again, allowing ourselves to succumb to this versus that. This versus that is very appealing, it's very compelling, it's very romantic. People enjoy doing that, but the frank truth is, my job is to look at it as a composite and be able to say that actually all your arguments in different degrees have value, but I can't say one predominates over the other.
And I think it's not just historians who are doing it. I mean, if you look at current events, for example, what's happening in Iran, I mean, what people are doing on the social media is, and I'm assuming if 10 years or 20 years from now, if somebody has to write the history, somebody would say this, 8,000 or 10,000 people who died, it's because of Mossad and Israel. I mean, there's one section who's arguing it's only that, and there's another section who's, who has a totally different narrative. So maybe this is how history is shaped, and 20, 30 years from now, we will see the same binaries that
and there's
right?
there's a mythologizing that takes place. I still remember there was a time in the 60s, I think when Indira Gandhi was in power, maybe just before, late 60s, when there was a whole Gorakshaks, a bunch of Gorakshaks had sort of gherawed out parliament, and I think they set fire to the minister Kamaraj's house and things like that. And when that happened, the Congress chief, or I don't think he was a minister then, but anyway, they set fire to his house and all of that. And I think the official record is that 6 or 8 people died or something. Okay, you say that maybe the officials played it down. 80 people died. 100, 200 people died. I've actually seen these online websites, right-wing websites, which will say things like 22,000 people died and they've been buried in unmarked graves by Indira Gandhi. And I was like, please, even if 6 is an understatement, I don't think 22,000 dead bodies being buried in unmarked graves in Delhi is very likely, right? So after a period of time, stories sort of coalesce and build around, there's a grain of truth, and then there's a lot of faff that sort of builds up around it. And people fall for a lot of that. Just this morning, again, on Facebook, I saw a post about somebody, they put up a post about a family of Mannanars. I think that's how you pronounce it. And there was a photograph of a lady. And then someone else posted an AI altered version of that lady, and she's holding a sword and a shield and all of that. And you're like, okay, people are obviously assuming this is that Mannanar Kettamma or something that lady is called. But I know who that lady is. That's actually a Devdasi from Tamil Nadu called Kumbakonam Balamani, who happened to be photographed in Malayali costume in the early 1900s when she was performing in Trivandrum. Our photo editor, she's now turned, here someone has turned her into Mannanar, someone else has turned into a warrior princess and all of that, but that's actually a lady from Kumbakonam who ran the Balapani dance company. പക്ഷേ, again, this is just the state of the world. 10 years from now, maybe that photo will show up on Wikipedia as this is Mannanar Amma or whatever it is, and Kumbakonam Balamani will be forgotten because she isn't a particularly prominent figure. So these things will happen.
So, I think the point that you are trying to make is unless you understand these complex narratives coexisting within the same story, you won't understand, you won't get a true picture of what our history is.
If your interest is finding that true picture. Now, the frank truth is for most people, that is not the interest. For most people, you want history that caters to your political view. You want history that caters to an emotional position that you have. You want history that caters to your identity and your sense of self. So if you're looking for history for that, then you're obviously not interested in the composite picture, as it were. So, as I said, that battle between what the facts suggest versus how the facts are interpreted in selective ways, that's a constant that will keep happening, and we'll all keep succumbing to it. I think all of us, I can't sit here on a high horse and claim that I've never been afflicted by it. Of course I have. There's also, I'm sure that in my 20s, etc., there were times when even I refused to believe certain things because they would not have sat well with, or I would not take it as at all possible that what that person was saying is true. I would not have given them the benefit of doubt and even wondered, wait, maybe they have a point. I wouldn't have done that. Now I've learned to be a lot more reserved before I issue judgment on any given topic.
But next question, I can see that our time is running out, but I really want to ask this question. Considering all of these complexities and nuances that you said we should keep in mind for historians as well as for readers, but is there a legitimate case of revisioning history versus political rewriting? How would you look at that?
But the thing is, it's never been the case that history has not been revisionist.
Okay.
What are academics engaged in? They're constantly revising, they're constantly sharpening. Any academic thesis, take a PhD thesis or a master's thesis, what you first see is these are the arguments that currently exist. I've got a fresh point to add, or I'm amending this argument in a certain way, or I'm pushing back against this argument. Every time somebody studies history and does a doctoral thesis or whatever, they are revising history one way or the other. So the idea that we need revisionist history and everything taught to us so far is some kind of conspiracy is not true. All generations of historians have been involved in that project of revising history. The difference is, sure, there are schools of thinking. So there is the Marxist school, there's the subaltern school, there's all of these schools of thinking in which the prism through which people approach history, that may vary. But the process of revising is constantly happening. And I think that will keep happening. So it's not the case that this is somehow a new thing that's happening. What you're seeing now is a conscious effort to create a kind of right-wing history. Which, and to be, I mean, I should also add that it isn't, as you indicated earlier, it isn't just the social media WhatsApp forwards. There are now people putting money into research and presenting it in a certain way, sponsoring awards and things like that.
Also revamping the curriculum in schools, right?
Yeah, that's a different conversation. But what I was saying earlier is these people who are putting money into it, at one level it's healthy. It's healthy in the sense that because they're putting money into it, these books are coming out as solidly argued books. You can also counter it, right? You can also push back and say, these are where I find flaws in your argument, because for the first time, these arguments are no longer coming in WhatsApp forwards, which are frivolous and stupid. They're coming out in book format in a way you can engage and you can point out, look, these are the reasons why I don't believe in your argument. Textbooks are a different case altogether, and then all governments keep changing them.
Okay, so now let's talk about some of the most hotly debated personalities from the past in India in 2025, and one definitely goes to Aurangzeb. And I don't know whether you said you haven't watched the movie Chava, even I didn't, but I saw a lot of these reels, and I read about how people were so emotional. They burst into tears while watching the movie. They came out, beating their chests.
They were doing that in the theater also.
In the theater also, and coming out of it also. There's a lot of theatrics, which also tells you a little bit about there's some sort of history where they haven't gotten a closure on one side, and there is this new brand of, history also being turned into popular culture in Bollywood. So, do you think that there is a weight or more responsibility on historians either to counter it or to coexist with it?
I think this is Bollywood catering to a market, because right now there is support for it, it sells, etc. Strangely, it doesn't always sell. There are some bad movies that have sunk without a trace. Okay. I haven't watched these movies. I've tried to watch one or two of them, and they're terrible. Okay. Like, you can't get past the first 5 minutes, including in one or two in Malayalam. I won't take names, but I remember trying to watch a movie, a Malayalam historical movie, and within the first 5 minutes I was like, oh, the costumes are wrong, the hairstyles are wrong.
I know which one you're talking about.
I cannot sit through this. No way. Like, no chance. So I'm aware that, movies, again, they exist on their own plane. Although I would again caution us from believing that just because Bollywood or certain industries in India are churning out these kind of films, that is somehow the only thing coming out. If I look at the overall picture of films being made in India, Kerala is making very interesting films. It's telling stories of a very original nature. The same is coming out of other states in India, in Maharashtra and Marathi, etc. So you realize that while Bollywood has overwhelming influence in public imagination, there's actually a lot of interesting good work that's also taking place in Indian cinema. Now, what you talk about wounds that haven't healed, to a certain extent is true. Again, remember, this is a very diverse and complicated country, right? So I grew up in Maharashtra, so I'm very aware that even today people in Maharashtra, when they think of Aurangzeb, they think of an invader, they think of a conqueror from the north. Because this was a zone that had its own culture and history and rulers, including Muslim rulers. Now, the right doesn't like it when I say this, where they say, oh, Aurangzeb came and oppressed all the Hindu rulers of the Deccan. But actually, Aurangzeb also destroyed the Muslim sultanates of the Deccan. His oppression was devoid of religion. He was oppressing everybody in the path of his political ambitions. So in Bijapur, in Golconda, these were Shia sultanates, and he used internal Muslim binaries, saying, oh, you are Shias, and therefore you're heretics, and therefore I'm justified in attacking your kingdom. With the Shivaji, he'd say that, oh, you're a heretic because you're a Hindu, and I will attack your kingdom. So he was conveniently weaponizing religion, not just against local Hindus, but also against local Muslim rulers. That's level number one. Despite that, he's seen locally very much as an outsider who came in and conquered this place. So when people there say want to rename Aurangabad to Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar, which is Sambhaji Shivaji's son, who was executed and brutally tortured by Aurangzeb, somewhere you understand the emotional resonance of it. Because for the people in that area, Sambhaji is the hero, and he's the one they sympathize with. He's the one they associate themselves culturally and historically with. And Aurangzeb is seen as the outsider who comes in. At the same time, Aurangzeb sitting in Delhi is an emperor. So he's going after people he sees as rebels, and he's acting as all emperors tend to do. Now, if you look at him personally, he doesn't seem to have been a particularly charismatic or likable man. There were more likable Mughal emperors. But the question is, we're not in the business of liking historical figures. I mean, there are historical figures you and I will like, and there are others we may not like. But historical figures don't owe it to us to be likable. My own ancestors believed in the caste system. Do I have to like them for it or whatever? No, that was their world. That's what they did, right? So if we are able to forgive our ancestors for believing in a caste-based society, which we now know was not right, similarly, historical figures operated in their old realm. And if in the 21st century we are choosing to pick on those wounds, that is an active choice. And that is often an invented kind of business. Because people, sometimes picking on certain wounds keeps a certain political momentum alive for certain causes.
To it.
Yeah. So I think there's that. At the same time, I think we should also not go to the other extreme of glorifying certain historical figures. I don't believe any historical figure needs to be glorified beyond proportion to start with. We should be able to critically examine all historical figures, whether it's an Aurangzeb, whether it's a Shivaji, whether it's any other historical figure in Indian history or world history even. In a sense, I think that will happen. It is happening. There are young kids who are interested in doing that. But the other extreme is the glorification as well.
I know I'm trying to simplify a matter which should go into grand scheme of things, but still I want to ask you, after 10 years, we hope you will continue writing for another 10 or 20 or 30 years or more than that.
Thank you.
Yes. But how would you essentially see the role of a historian? Would it be to clarify, to offer us more complexities? How would you redefine the role of or is there a need to redefine the role of a historian?
No, I think it would be too vain of me to pretend that I know the answer to, how would you redefine a historian's role? I think we need more history. I think we need people to be more aware of history, because often what happens is people are susceptible to social media, misinformation, etc., because they don't have a grounding in how to approach history. I don't necessarily mean facts and figures. You don't need to know which year the Battle of Plassey happened, etc. But you need to develop an instinct to recognize good history versus some kind of slop that's been turned out by AI or a WhatsApp figure sitting somewhere far away and is passing off Kumbakonam Balamani as you know what. So you need to be able to develop that instinct. So I think the role of a historian is more public history, in my opinion at least, which is taking well-researched history out of the seminar circuit, out of the classroom alone. Classroom has its space, but also putting it out in audiences like this, on social media, etc. I think that is the next frontier that we need to sort of, at least responsible historians need to develop the skill to handle that, because otherwise that space currently has been largely occupied and dominated by people who have a malicious interest in history, not a constructive interest in history. They're actually not interested in history, they're interested in weaponizing history. So the only way to counter that is to be on the battlefield, and then, when the time comes, give a chamat right back.
Yeah, so I think I just want to reframe that question which I asked you. Not like how do you redefine it, but in the beginning of the discussion we spoke about the topics that you had dealt with, from Travancore to false allies to rebel sultans to gods, guns and missionaries, all of that. But now as you enter the second decade of your writing, what kind of topics would you be compelled to pick? Is there something that has picked your interest?
That's a good question, because frankly, I've got ideas in my head in general. I've always got about 3 book ideas that I want to do. But at the moment, I haven't decided what I'm going to do. I think one thing that really interests me is biography, because I don't think we have enough biographical kind of studies done in this country. Because biography is also a very good way of reminding people that human beings are not black and white. That the person you admire can have dark shades, they can have complicated shades, they can do horrible things, they can have an interesting sex life. All of these things are combined in one human being, just as we do all of these things, right? You're seeing me sitting here on stage. For all you know, backstage, I'm sitting and picking my nose. It's the same person, right? But it's not just the public image that matters. Being able to look at historical figures as complete human beings with the warts and all of that, I think that helps people recognize and develop some of that historical instinct. So I think for me, biography is something that I want to do more of. There are one or two characters I want to work on, but as of now, I haven't bothered to go there because, my last book came out in November 2025. And as I often tell people that, in Malayalam, നമ്മൾ തോർത്ത് പിഴിയല്ലോ. Otherwise, I got pirified by that book. So I'm taking a bit of a break from writing for this year and doing a documentary series. But that's another thing that I want to do, right? Which is that I want to be able to, some of it is personal. I don't want to be stuck behind a desk for the next year, for the next 18 months or so. So for that reason, I'm actually taking myself out there because I want to be out and about in historical sites and talk to people about history. That's why I'm doing this documentary series. I'm doing it at my pace. I'm doing it with a heritage NGO. We're both putting
ARPO,
in
right?
ARPO. So we're putting in funds. They brought the team. I'm putting in some money. So it's a labor of love. There's no profit motive to it, but it's just for me to put myself out there and explore this and talk to people who also carry history with them. So our last episode, for example, was with a lady from the Cochin family talking about how princes in that family were radicalized and became communists.
If people if they don't know about ARPO and that particular episode you're doing, if you could elaborate on that, it'll be good.
Just look up on YouTube. There's a page called ARPO. It's I don't know the full form of
Is it the Malayalam ARPO? Like we have a word called ARPO, right?
Udesham. ARPO.in is the website, and we're doing a series called Saga. 3 episodes are out. 4th one will be out on February 1st. And with each, I'm tackling a different topic as we go. So the plan is to do 10 episodes because that's the amount of money I've allocated to it. After that, I'll start going broke, so I don't want to do that. 10 episodes. So that's what I'm planning to do. So I think maybe in the coming 10 years of my career, you'll see more of that kind of stuff, like engaging with not just writing, not just sitting behind my desk and doing books, but also more actively putting myself out there. Presenting history on the screen. That would be an interesting challenge as well for me personally.
Yeah. So I think historians are also rediscovering and rebranding them. So, not sticking to the conventional form of storytelling. Because I listened to 1 or 2 of your episodes. Because that is also a kind of history telling. I mean, either you could read from the pages of your book. So I think we have 1 more minute to go. Should we open it to the audience? Yeah.
Hello, sir, and congratulations on officially completing a decade of writing. So, as you said that you already have an established readership, but given the current political scenario, we also need to have space for dialogue even to the other side. So, I want to know, is it challenging because you must also cater to they also listen to you? So, as a writer, would you be strategic, or how do you navigate through wanting more readership towards this side so they actually see truth as you say it?
I think one example I can give you is the last book that I did, Girls, Guns and Missionaries. That book actually has been read. I thought I'd get cancelled by different sides for that book, but actually people have read it from multiple sides of the political divide, which I thought was very interesting. So although there was one nasty review which basically said, oh, this is colonial mindset, something or the other. But other than that, even right-wing websites actually read the book, they engaged with the book, and they had fairly thoughtful reviews to write. They may not have liked everything I wrote, and they may have certain bones to pick with it, but I was happy with the fact that they read the book. Similarly, I read a great deal of the right-wing stuff that comes out because it's important for me to also be aware of what the arguments are being made by that side, right? Because I can't purely sit in an echo chamber and cater to my crowd, as it were. I need to know what different people are thinking. Because at some level, it also provokes you to think, saying, hold on, did I succumb to an ideological position? Do they have a point there? And then you investigate, and then it either reinforces your position or you realize that, hold on, maybe I need to alter or nuance my position a little bit. So I think it's healthy that you're able to do that. And so my experience with the last book has been that, if you try and be even-handed, you might actually be read by all kinds of people. You may not be liked by all kinds of people, but again, as I said, we're not in the business of being liked. We're in the business of being read.
Hi, I'm Geeta. I would like to know how much significance do you give for oral history when you write a book or while you research? How much significance do you give for oral history?
It depends on the topic. So for instance, if you're writing something from, say, 600 years ago, a lot of the oral history might come in the form of legends, temple stories, anecdotes like that. So then you collect that, but you use that in a certain way. You can't take that as gospel truth. So there is with certain stories. For example, in one of the essays in Courtesan, the Mahatma and the Italian Brahmin, is about the Muslim wife of Vishnu in the Sri Rangam temple. She's called Tulukanachiyar. If you look at the temple chronicles, it's a lot of myth making and it's legendary facts, things that happen that are not practically possible, they happen that way. But the existence of a Muslim goddess inside a Hindu temple and the existence of that story is also communicating something to you. So there, using that temple legend and that oral history, etc., is important to be able to find what that communication is. What is it the story is trying to tell you? In other respects, you don't necessarily need that much oral history. For example, if you're analyzing, I mean, you do need oral history, but for example, there's a recent biography of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Now, he's a very recent figure, died less than a decade ago. Now, with a figure like that, there is, of course, archival material, there's newspapers that cover his entire career, all of that. But there's also a lot of gossip, because he had an unusual marriage, he was living with a married woman, all of that. You're not going to find documents for it. That reality of the man, that he enjoyed eating meat, that he was living with a married woman, this comes out of oral history of circles around him. But the third element with oral history is also that the writer doesn't want to be sued. So you have to be a bit careful when you go into oral history, because sometimes if it's delicate topics or sensitive topics, the chance or likelihood of you being sued or taken to court is also high, especially if there are thin-skinned descendants all over the place. So, but it is important. There is no good history without oral history.
I've read only Ivory Throne of yours, so my question comes from there. So in this age of 30-second reels, what made you think of writing a 700-page book? And
You're
what was
very
your
young,
experience?
obviously, because I started writing that book before the age of 30-second reels. I started working on that book in 2009, and it was published in 2015. There were no reels in 2015. But even then, I agree that 700 pages, frankly, I had no idea the book was that long. I just wrote the book I wanted to write, and because it's your first book and you've worked really hard on it and you've collected all of this material nobody's touched before, there's a natural anxiety to put it all out there. You're like, I have to put everything out there, which now I've realized I'm far more selective in the sense that I'll put a lot of stuff in the notes as opposed to in the main text in my recent books, because I realized you don't need to overwhelm the reader with every detail. Even if the details are interesting, not every reader will find it interesting. So I think that's also the reason the book turned out to be 700 pages. When I first met my editor, Kartika, she was at HarperCollins in those days, she read the entire manuscript on her iPad. So she also had no sense of the length of the book. So she signed a contract with me, we agreed to everything, and we met for the first time over a slice of cake in Delhi. And I remember her saying, so it must be a 150,000 word manuscript. And I said, no, it's 245,000 words. And she's like, no, that creates a pricing issue. Can it be a hardback book or a paperback book? Eventually, they had to print it just as a paperback book because that was the only way to make it at a reasonable price and cost effective and all of that. So some of those things are pure accidents. There's no great strategy there. We're ignoring people at the back. Huh?
Sir, നമ്മൾ റീസെൻ്റ്ലി ഹിസ്റ്ററി നമ്മൾ കണ്ട ഒരു കഥ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നമ്മൾ കണ്ട ഒരു യാഥാർത്ഥ്യം അതിനെ അന്വേഷിച്ച് പോകുമ്പോൾ കിട്ടുന്ന സത്യങ്ങൾ, പക്ഷെ അത് നമ്മളെല്ലാവരും കണ്ട യാഥാർത്ഥ്യമായതുകൊണ്ട് അത് ആൾക്കാർ കാണാൻ വിസമ്മതിക്കും എന്നുള്ള ഫാക്റ്റ് ഞാൻ ഒരു എക്സാമ്പിളിലൂടെ പറയാം. 2018 പ്രളയം നമ്മളെല്ലാവരും കണ്ടതാണ്, 2020 കൊറോണ നമ്മളെല്ലാം കണ്ടതാണ്. പക്ഷേ അതിൻ്റെ സത്യം തേടി പോകുമ്പോൾ ആ സത്യം ആരോട് പറഞ്ഞാലും വിശ്വസിക്കില്ലാത്ത ലെവലിലേക്ക് മാറി. കാരണം 2018 ചൊല്ലി ഒരു സിനിമ വന്നു, 2018 ചൊല്ലി ഒരുപാട് ന്യൂസ് ക്ലിപ്പിംഗ്സ് ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ അതിൻ്റെ സത്യം തേടി പോകുന്ന ആൾക്ക് ഒരിക്കലും ആ സത്യം പുറത്തു പറയാനാവില്ലല്ലോ. അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് എന്താ അഭിപ്രായം?
അപ്പോൾ ഇത് തന്നെയാണ് ഹിസ്റ്ററിയുടെ പ്രശ്നവും. ഇപ്പം നമ്മുടെ തന്നെ ജീവിതത്തിൽ മെനിഞ്ഞാന്ന് നടന്ന സംഭവത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് ഒരു വാട്ട് അഞ്ജന സീസ് മേ നോട്ട് ബി വാട്ട് ഐ സീ. സെയിം സംഭവമാണ്, രണ്ടുപേരും ഒരേ ബോക്സിനെയാണ് നോക്കുന്നത്, പക്ഷേ ഷീസ് ലുക്കിംഗ് അറ്റ് ഇറ്റ് ഫ്രം ദാറ്റ് ആംഗിൾ, ഞാൻ ഈ ആംഗിളിൽ കൂടെയാണ് നോക്കുന്നത്. ഇപ്പം ഗാസയിൽ നടക്കുന്ന സംഭവം, it's happening in front of our eyes. Social media lo noku, the difference in the way people are interpreting it, the refusal to accept certain things, etc. appo nammade mumbil thanne nadakkunna karyangalil human beings are unable to agree. appo history ide karyam onu alochichu nokku. appo njangal idu thaneyana ennum neridunathu. when you go into the archives, you are constantly fighting this same tendency. മാത്രമല്ല ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കൽ റെക്കോർഡ്സ് ആകുമ്പം ആരെ എഴുതിയതാണെന്നുള്ള ഒരു ചോദ്യവും വരും. നമ്മളിപ്പം പത്രങ്ങൾ നോക്കിയാൽ തന്നെ ഇന്നത്തെ കാലത്ത് എസ്പെഷ്യലി വെൻ ദ മീഡിയ ഇസ് നോട്ട് എൻറ്റയർലി ഒബ്ജക്റ്റീവ്, നാഷണൽ ലെവൽ മീഡിയ ഇസ് നോട്ട് അറ്റ് ഓൾ ഒബ്ജക്റ്റീവ്, അവർ വളരെ പാർട്ടിസൺ ആയിട്ടാണ് ഓപ്പറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു 10 വർഷം ശേഷം ഇന്നത്തെ കാലത്തെ ഹിസ്റ്ററി ഒരാൾ എഴുതുവാണെങ്കിൽ ഇഫ് ദ ലുക്ക് അറ്റ് ദ ന്യൂസ് പേപ്പർ റെക്കോർഡ്സ് നമ്മൾ ഏതോ വലിയ സ്വർണ്ണകാലത്ത് ജീവിക്കുന്ന ഒരു ഇംപ്രഷൻ ആയിരിക്കും ചിലപ്പം കിട്ടുന്നത്. സോ ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് വൈ യു ഹാവ് ടു കോൺസ്റ്റന്റ്ലി പുഷ് അഗൈൻസ്റ്റ് ദ ഗ്രെയിൻ. നമ്മളിപ്പം കാണുന്നത് തന്നെയാണ് ഹിസ്റ്ററിയിൽ എപ്പോഴും നടക്കുന്നത്. അതിന് സൊല്യൂഷനായിട്ട് എനിക്കൊന്നുമില്ല, കാരണം മനുഷ്യർ ഇങ്ങനെ തന്നെയാണ്, നമ്മളൊരു സ്ലൈറ്റ്ലി ബുദ്ധിമോശം കാണിക്കുന്ന ഒരു സ്പീഷീസ് ആണ്.
Hello. Hi, Manu. How have you been?
I can't see you.
I'm here. I'm here.
there.
Yeah. Hi. So my question is, I'll pick on something that you had mentioned in between your speech. So if at all the advocacy in the form of writing comes from a sort of a privileged voice, do you think there is an optics to view it as merely as a literature of patronizing, which can really undermine the credibility and merit of the writing that has been presented, just because it comes from a particular voice? I would like to know your views on that.
No, I don't think you can, because I think all of these writings have value, especially in a historical sense. All of these writings, as I said, you're not taking the writings at face value. You're not taking it as gospel truth. You're not assuming that what is in the writings is the final word on it. You're analyzing it, which means you have to bring that analytical lens to everything. So I never believe that anything is a waste. Frankly, every tweet that's put out, every bit of fake news that's put out, this is all historical material for future historians. Even bad stuff that is written, unconvincing stuff that is written, all of this has historical value in trying to figure out our times when future historians write about it. Similarly, just because something is written by somebody of a privileged background or written in a certain language, etc., that doesn't disqualify it from being taken seriously as a historical source, but it has to be analyzed to see how much merit there is in that particular source. Other sources may have greater merit, certain sources may have, let's say, less than good merit to them. For example, in the reign of Akbar himself, there was a friend of Akbar's who wrote a text, Abul Fazl, glorifying Akbar, because he was buddies with the emperor and really wanted to make the emperor look good. But there was also a slightly conservative Darbar figure who wrote a secret history in which everything Akbar does is negative. Both of these are not neutral accounts. Both of these are not objective accounts. One is interested in glorifying, the other is interested in completely thrashing Akbar. The historian's job is to look at both, analyze both, and try and pull out insights from both of those sources. Thank you. Thank you to the audience. I know it's been a very hot afternoon, and I really am grateful that all of you came and sat here despite the lack of or limited ventilation and despite the heat. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Anjana, and thank you to the organizers.